Hi, Dolores. How are you? And hi, Brian Gary. Thank you both for arriving promptly. It's nice to see you here. I'll be starting in just a few minutes. And just to give people a chance to arrive. Hello, hello, hello. Now you should be able to see me as well as hear me. If there are any difficulties, please let me know. Okay, please tell me if my sound is okay. Hi, Lana. How are you tonight? Nice to see you here. Okay, I'll be doing two streams tonight. This is the first stream, and the title of it is How Do We End the Bias in the Mainstream Media? So that will be the first of the streams. And the second of the streams will be on the topic of the attempts of people to use actually biomass as a carbon neutral fuel. Oh, you're at your desk again. So late. It's 9:06 on a Saturday night. Wow. Hi, honey. I see you're here now. Very good. Okay. Anyway, to get on with the first of the streams. Over the last week and a half or so, we've had Bernie Sanders. He's been critiquing the media. He's been pushing back. And the media have been telling him, there's no bias here. Move along, move along. Oh, there's nothing to see here. But in particular, Bernie was talking about the Washington Post showing continuous bias against him in the way they behave. And he wonders if it has anything to do with the owner and the fact that he's constantly criticizing Bezos and Amazon. And they say in return, we've worked here for X many years, depending upon who it is that's doing the answering of the charge, and we've never known Mr. Bezos to interfere with the editorial policy of the paper, with any of our commentaries, or our coverage of the news. He just has a real hands-off attitude. And so uh, we're not responding to any orders from him, okay, or from Amazon that we have to be critical of you and your policies. We've just been being critical as part of our news coverage because you deserve the criticism. And we're being perfectly objective in giving you that particular criticism. And the rest of us are sitting there and we're looking on and looking on, okay, and looking on. And I suspect most of us are saying and thinking, hey, Washington Post, we've got a bridge to sell you. You know, the proverbial bridge connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn. So, of course, I talked about that, okay, a couple of days ago. Okay, I did a video on that. And I went through the whole case as to why it's perfectly obvious that the Washington Post and many other outlets in the mainstream media have been heavily biased against Sanders, and I don't want to rehash that now. The question I want to raise now is: okay, granted that there's bias against Bernie Sanders, and maybe against a lot of other candidates too. And maybe also bias in relation to various issues they cover, okay, as well. So, granted that that proposition is true, but it doesn't seem as though there's anybody, even when they grant the proposition, that is willing to go further and to talk about how to end it. Their point of view seems to be, well, we can't be like Trump and try to control the press and try to control the media. So what is there to do? All we can do is point out all the bias, and in pointing out all the bias, maybe the mainstream media is going to give us a break, and they're going to quit being so biased. Well, first, okay, I want to say, as has been documented in many posts and many videos concerning this issue, most of the MSM commentators and people who claim to be reporters of the news will be biased in favor of the narratives of the establishment. And they're going to do so because they're inside social institutions, inside of social systems that have a set of incentives, and but also reinforcements, part of the subculture of the institutions that ensures that most of the commentators, okay, and that most of the reporters are going to be biased in favor of the narratives of the establishment. And that if people want to find some other narratives, they have to be satisfied with looking at the few people in the mainstream who defy the conventional wisdom, but even more importantly, that if people want to get other points of view, if they want to look at alternative points of view to the narratives of the media, they have to look to alternative media to correct the bias of the mainstream media. They have to learn. They have to hear. They have to learn the but narratives of the alternative media. Now, I'm not trying to claim that the alternative media isn't going to be biased. People have their points of view. They have their points of view in the establishment, and they have their points of view in the alternative media. And while I am not a relativist, okay, and I certainly believe that it's possible for a particular narrative to be closer to the truth, okay, than other narratives, and that we have ways and means of knowing whether certain of the alternatives are closer to the truth, okay, than other of the stories, but that are out there and that okay are circulating. Just because a particular narrative is close to the truth doesn't mean that such a narrative is also value free and doesn't have a filter of some kind. It's not possible to dispense with all of our filters. It's not possible to be filter free. It's possible to have a better filter and possible to have a worse filter. But it's not possible to be filter free. The nature, okay, of objectivity does not lie in being filter free. It lies in being the best of a number of alternative stories or narratives, or to be more formal, a set of okay, alternative kinds of theories that are close to the truth, okay, than the competing alternatives. We know by now that the mainstream has produced a series, okay, of establishment stories, okay, and narratives that have not been serving us well. They have not been allowing us to adapt to changes in our society. They have not worked for us. They have departed too much from the truth. And that's why we must look to alternative media for other stories that work better and that are closer to the truth. So, we must have alternative media. But can we have that media thrive? Can we have it survive? Can we have it grow? Can we create a safe space where we have alternative media competing successfully against by the establishment media? I mean, in relative terms, the alternative media we see have no capital. They don't have journalists and commentators that are as polished as the journalists and the commentators we see on the mainstream. When we look at the other media, we see media that perhaps is not as entertaining. It's not as smooth. It's not as professional. However, it does produce a lot of alternative narratives. And we need those narratives. And we need for the alternative media to survive and prosper enough so it can keep on producing those narratives. And in many, many cases, some pretty good examples of alternative institutions aren't finding the support they need to continue functioning. There are so many of the alternative institutions that are begging, 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 begging for contributions. They're always short of money. They're always in some kind, of a begging mode. How can we create a safer space for these media, for the new media, for the fresh media? How can we give them a better chance to survive? Well, one way is we all have to determine that to the extent that this is possible, we're not going to watch or listen to the mainstream media any longer. We know their narratives are full of lies and full of propaganda. And not simply propaganda, but conscious propaganda, intentional propaganda that is designed to mislead us. We know at least that a lot of the alternative new media we see has people that try to tell the truth as they see it. Their filters may be biased, as well. They may have other problems, but we can see these people out there who are dedicated to telling the truth as they see the truth. It's apparent to us when we look at them and when we read it that these people are interested in the truth because they're correcting various distortions that are coming out of the mainstream all the time. The orientation of the new media seems to be critical. Critical, 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 critical. Whereas the mainstream, the old media, seems to be only dedicated to reinforcing the older narratives and stories that they've been giving us for years. It seems difficult for them to produce any new narratives, any new talking points. So, one thing we have to do is to cease to rely on the mainstream as best we can and to find different commentators, different people who are reporters, and journalists who we at least have the feeling are trying to get us closer to reality as it exists. How can we create more financial support? Can we get that by creating a foundation? That is a 501c3, charged with the task of creating and funding such companies, and perhaps making sure that these new companies have a cooperative form, of organization. Can we perhaps have that foundation in return for their financial support in the seeding stage of the new media, have a contract with the new media saying that they will always remain cooperatives and that they will always stay within a certain size. So they never get so large that they're dominating the media market. We need to have we need to have really an abundance, okay, of alternative media that is relatively small compared to the conglomerates that we have now, and that is devoted to news and devoted to seeking truth rather than being devoted to entertainment. Uh, the conglomerates we have now are devoted to entertainment and not really devoted to the truth. So, is the idea of creating a foundation charged with the task of creating and funding such companies and making them cooperatives a good idea or not? It seems to me that is a good idea. Such a foundation might start out as one that is actually privately funded, as basically charities. As soon as a friendly administration comes into power that wants to empower the new media, it might actually purchase that foundation and create an organization that is like the National Science Foundation, perhaps a National Journalism Foundation, that would have the task of creating and funding new companies continuously and ensuring that they have a cooperative form, okay, of organization so that they can never be dominated by a few people who are essentially the oligarchs that run the companies. Our conglomerates today are run by oligarchs. They are among the most powerful of the oligarchs. However, the new cooperatives should not be like that, as long as they're governed by contracts that ensure that they will stay cooperatives forever. And as long as there are size requirements that are set into the contracts they sign with the national foundation that gets them started. So that's the second idea. The first idea is to, as much as possible, ignore the mainstream and find alternative sources. And the second idea is to create a foundation which backs the continuous creation of these new companies so that there are always new companies, always new competitors to the old companies. And that these are always cooperatives whose owners can never be so rich that they end up by creating the oligarchies that we see now in the entertainment industry. can we also create or find some platforms now, in this case, number three, where the owners have a hands off policy, okay, and also can we create or find but can we migrate away from platforms that don't have these kinds of policies as soon as possible while patronizing the new platforms where the owners and managers don't have a hands off policy. The platforms we see now, where we can find the posts and we can find the videos, okay, of the new media, okay, are efficient platforms, but they are now big organizations and very powerful organizations. And their interest, like the old establishment organizations, is more in the nature of producing content that is entertaining and that gets all kinds of views and that is not oriented towards but giving the people within a democracy the news they need to serve as intelligent, responsible, and discerning citizens of a democracy. So, question I raise, can we migrate away from these platforms and move to patronizing the new platforms that have a hands off policy and that give us reason to believe that they will always have a hands off policy? Of course, it's not only up to the people who run the new platforms. If we really do migrate away from the old platforms because they don't have a hands off policy and go to the new platforms because they do, and this becomes known, then that will be an incentive for the new platforms to stay with a hands off policy uh, as they grow. Fourth, can we exert very heavy pressure of a political nature to get the mainstream communications empires actually broken up? We have allowed these empires to grow so rapidly and to such a great extent that they are concentrated, some of them beyond our imagining. And because of the failure of antitrust policy in the United States, now the failure is 40 to 45 years old. We haven't stopped the concentration in media, okay, and entertainment. But if we want to see our democracy survive, it's not enough to complain about the bias, as Bernie has done. It's also necessary to break up the communications conglomerates and to develop institutions that will never allow concentration that we have now in the media to continue to exist again. That is so important. And fifth, We need to prohibit communications companies above a certain size, and of course we have those now, from actually providing either financial or in kind contributions to candidates, or to PACs that endorse candidates or that strive to shape the political opinions that the public has with respect to issues. We also need to stop extremely large companies. Okay, in other words, the conglomerates we find in the mainstream from endorsing candidates as they have been doing. They have too much reach, they have too much coverage, and therefore they have too great, an influence. The only way we can curtail that influence is to curtail their particular political activity as a conglomerate, as an organization. We have failed to do that, and these conglomerates have now become a part of the oligarchy that is governing us. Clearly, we don't have a democracy any longer. We may be able to get one back, but we clearly don't have one any longer. We now, as Bernie Sanders says, do have an oligarchy, actually, a series of interrelated oligarchies, culminating in an oligarchy at the top that shapes things for all of us. We have to end that, and I hope the 5 points that I've made here in this video will help us to begin to act, to go beyond the issue of bias, but to the question of what we're going to do to find a cure for that particular bias. So thank you. That's the first of my streams today. I will now entertain comments and questions from you. And Lana says, just for your information, Joy will be interviewing the 3 candidates who are going against by Nancy Pelosi tonight. I might have to duck out. I understand, Lana. And Randy Hedgebeth has joined, and my daughter Devora has joined, and Dave Phelps has joined, and Byron Montgomery has joined, and Peter Duran has joined. So thank you all for joining. I'm now taking questions and comments. So if you have any, then please do ask them, and I'll take them for, I don't know, let's just see how the discussion goes. Okay, so what do you think? How do we end the bias that we see in the mainstream media? Okay, basically, my answer is we need to build an alternative media that will seriously compete with the mainstream media, and we need to leave the mainstream media behind. That's my answer. And I provided actually 5 steps, okay, in getting there. Okay, so what do you think? Please give me some commentary. While I wait, I'm going to have a little bit of my wine. I'll be even more specific. I'll have a little bit of my $3 chuck, if anybody knows what that is. Hey, Rob, how are you? Have you any comments for me tonight? And the bias, the only way is to put them out of business. I've suggested a gradual way of doing that, at least with respect to some of the outlets. That's what this stream was about. Rob says he's doing good. Well, I'm doing good too, Rob. I'm glad to hear you're doing good. I'm doing real well. If you go look, you'll find 4 more streams up on my YouTube channel. At the minimum, we should at least bring the fairness doctrine back. Absolutely, we should bring the fairness doctrine back. Why didn't I think of that? That's a sixth point. We'll bring the fairness doctrine back. I always liked the fairness doctrine, and I always thought that it was part of that. When we got rid of the fairness doctrine, we're making a big, big mistake. That was part and parcel of the move to these huge entertainment conglomerates. The end of the fairness doctrine was part of the anti-regulation trend that has put us in the box that we're in right now. What a mistake that was. That's got to rank with the repeal of Glass-Steagall, something we never should have done. Problem I see is the funding of this operation without interference from the special interests. Yeah, that's always absolutely always the problem. I agree. Thanks, Rob. And Russell Goldman has just joined. Hi, Russ. How you doing? Nice to see you here. And how are things down in Georgia? Yeah, it was pretty hot here today. Also, we pretty much stayed inside. It was like 91 here today in the DC area. I stayed inside and posted up some videos on on YouTube, and then I prepared my two streams for tonight. And Bonnie and I also did a little bit, and we also did some entertaining as well. Kind of unexpected entertaining, but it was fun. We also have to break up the media conglomerates because after the CBS Viacom merger, we're now down to the five corporations. Yes, Rob, I entirely agree. In fact, one of my points in my presentation was that we have to break up these extremely huge conglomerates, and we have to make sure that nothing like them ever forms up again by placing size limitations on corporations. We don't want to do anything to restrict anybody's freedom of speech. All we want to do is do things to limit the reach of any one organization and the power of any one organization. So we safeguard a free marketplace, okay, of ideas. We got to get back to that, but on the free marketplace, okay, of ideas. The only way we'll get there is regulations that are really, really strong and merciless enforcement of those regulations. Any other comments? I don't know if they've destroyed our art, okay, and culture, but what they've done is to relegate, okay, a lot of the new art, okay, and the new culture to backwaters, where people are finding it extremely difficult to support themselves. And Rob says, if you listen to the music of today, it's terrible. Compared to what, Rob? Music from the 40s to the 90s. What I mean is they're controlling what we read and hear. Well, they're trying to control it, and insofar as we continue to watch their programs, they will, of course, keep succeeding in controlling what we read and what we hear. It's interesting to see the new platforms and how they're trying to push people to the mainstream content, okay, as much as they can. Just in the last couple of months, I've noticed that when I go to the YouTube content that I would like to see. Okay, that interests me. Okay, in the first place. Okay, and it's always the content that's comes from sources. Okay, that are relatively new sources. Okay, alternative sources. And I've spent maybe 5, 10, or 15 minutes. Okay, in watching about something like that, and then the video ends, and almost invariably I get a push from YouTube to MSNBC. They want me to watch an MSNBC the program on YouTube. But next, sometimes it's the CNN. Mostly, it's MSNBC, and it's never Fox. Why? Because they know that I don't like Fox. And they've decided, I guess, internally, that when what I want to watch is done, they're going to push me to some mainstream source. And they're going to leave it to me to monitor that and to shift away from it if I so desire. And I do desire that. And I do immediately shift away to something else. Rob says the TV shows of now are terrible. I remember watching television shows from back then that were very well written. My favorites are I Love Lucy, Carol Burnett, Seinfeld, Frasier. Well, Seinfeld and Frasier came from another generation as opposed to I Love Lucy and Carol Burnett. Okay, Rob, I'm here to tell you the Australian shows and the New Zealand shows and the UK shows are better than our TV shows. And Rob says, my grandma got me watching I Love Lucy. Oh, God. That was so awful. Yes, I know the writing was thought of, as pretty good at that time. But I outgrew it at a fairly young age. I don't think I've replaced it with anything, though. Okay, so thank you for the commentary. I don't see a lot of it, so I think I'm going to sign off now. And I'll be back in a relatively few minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, with my second stream of the evening, which is on one aspect of the Green Revolution and the Green New Deal. Specifically, it's going to deal with don't burn the trees to fight climate change. Let them grow, which is a commentary on an article by Bill McKibben, which appeared in the New Yorker. So, okay, I'll see you in a few minutes. I'm going to sign off for now.